I'm going to challenge you on that.
You are absolutely full of it, mate.
Architecturally, there is no chance of awareness.
Is this just going to be used to surveil and control?
Thought does not require language.
Everything could be reduced to a mating call.
The idea that it will emerge by accident is utter nonsense.
If that doesn't result in human flourishing, then I don't want it.
That's why I care about it, because people get hurt.
You always make me feel like I'm a moron.
It's a deep character flaw of mine.
Just... Thank you for joining me. You are quickly becoming one of my favourite LinkedIn follows because of your dismantling of, should we say, mistaken takes. As a guy who has spent a long time doing AI, this must be very difficult, seeing this huge rise of popularity and misunderstanding as well.
Yes, it's also a deep character flaw of mine. I regularly wake up in the morning and go, not today. And one day I will achieve that goal.
Probably only in death's sweet embrace, John, from what I can gather.
Yes, at the hands of somebody on LinkedIn.
I would love to hear about what you've been working on, the history of that and what you're doing now.
I've worked on many different things. AI was something I engaged with very early on. I started out in the defence industry and strategic research. I came across neural networks, and I've always had a fascination for how the brain works, because I think the complexity of nature is vast, which is why I didn't study it as a subject. I avoided it because there's far too much to remember, and I did the easy stuff, which is maths and science, where you just remember a couple of rules and answer all the questions. And that's where I came across LLM type technology as it is now, but at the time just feed-forward backpropagation neural networks and the backpropagation algorithm, and used them to try out some concepts like tracking a dot on a screen, and then moving on to more practical elements of being aware of the surroundings, sound recognition, and on the other side of it, decision making, a thing that can react. And one of the problems with backpropagation is if you teach it about cats, then you teach it about dogs, you find out it only knows about dogs. And what you realize is you have to do dog, cat, dog, cat, dog, cat, dog, cat. You have to keep everything balanced, because forgetting is something it does very well.
AI was this weird catch-all phrase until LLMs came along. And because our primary form of communication, this is arguable, but primarily it's language, and how mimetic language is, how easily it conveys ideas. That seemed to be where everybody lit up and went, oh, wow, I get it. And that also led instantly to the anthropomorphizing, which you seem to absolutely adore, stomping all over and kicking people whenever they make any allusions to that. You mentioned something that may be more akin to something like sentience, even though it's never going to look like human, because we're embodied and so on. I would love to hear your dismantling of that, but also where it might actually be a thing.
Sure, yeah, there's so much in that question. The first thing I came across was backpropagation, and I thought, the holy grail. This is the easiest thing in the world. Got backpropagation working, got neural networks working, very quickly found out the limitation, which is you have to carefully curate the learning set and the order which it's presented in to ensure the neural network learns and doesn't forget the older stuff. This didn't feel right. It's not how we learn. I don't forget how to ride a bike. A feed-forward network does. So I did a bit more digging and came across other structures, networks, coherent nets, and so on. They all have one thing in common. They're recurrent. You have connections inside the network from neuron to neuron and back to earlier neurons, and they compete with each other and they help each other, and they're aware of each other in inverted commas. They have inputs from all the other neurons. So each neuron in a way is its own little ecosystem that can see everything else around it and be affected by it. And I started trying things out with those, and they can be continuously taught. So I started to look into the neuroscience of the brain. Two things you learn from that. Any biological neuron is vastly more complicated than even the recurrent, quite complicated neurons that we create right now. But secondly, recurrence is fundamentally needed for something to learn in a continuous way without forgetting older stuff, and also to actually solve new problems. Plug a completely vanilla neural network into a robotic arm and simply using a punish-reward type signal, +1, -1, as it gets better or warmer, like playing the hot or colder game, and get it to track an object. A recurrent network can do that incredibly quickly. So in a simulator alone, it can do it in less than a second. It can go from not understanding the robotic arm to tracking an object in under a second of simulated time. A feed-forward network can do it, but if you then turn the learning off, it hasn't learned anything. It just stops tracking the dot. Whereas in the recurrent network, if you say don't learn anymore, it has fundamentally learned how to track the dot and will keep doing it. So much more sophisticated, much more capable, and much more like brains. And this is where I come on to the conscious argument. We don't necessarily know, and we can't say that something is conscious, but I think what I'm comfortable saying is if a network is set up in such a way that each of the neurons has no idea what the other neurons are doing, then they can't even be at a mechanistic level aware, because they're not responding to any of those things. In a similar way to if you don't connect that neural network to the outside world, it wouldn't know about the outside world. So I think my conclusion to all of that is our brains know what our brains are doing at a neuron level. We don't understand it necessarily, but we are aware of it going on, and our neurons are aware of it going on. And that to me is the seed of awareness. Where it becomes awareness is a whole different question. So what we can say is, in my opinion, LLMs do not have that. So architecturally, there is no chance of awareness. And we can see that in their behaviour as well. How they respond to language, they don't have any understanding, and it's simply human thought being regurgitated towards us in a very clever and very useful way. It's not thought, it's not awareness, and it's not reasoning. It's simply the appearance of all of that.
And it's very compelling. It can sound so smart, but effectively it is a parlour trick of sorts. So you talked about a recurrent network. How different is that architecturally? And could that then be more akin to the way our brains work?
It could be. I don't hold with biological exceptionalism. I don't hold with the idea that because the only intelligent things we are aware of so far are biological in nature, that it can't therefore be reproduced. It's like saying the only things we know that fly are biological, so therefore we'll never fly. We had to understand the underlying mechanisms of lift in order to fly. Driving a car off of a bridge is not flying, it's falling.
With
in
style.
a scary, falling with style, I like it. By understanding the underlying principles, you can reproduce things, even at a rough level. So I do believe it's reproducible. I do believe that this recurrence within is important because it maintains current state. And it can maintain many states simultaneously. So, when you're thinking and you have 5 ideas and you're trying to work, and one of them comes out. So you go for one, you make a choice, and you talk about one particular thing that's occurred to you to say. There's something going on there above and beyond next token prediction. Now, at some level, yes, you're using a technique within your brain that allows you to come up with words that could be said next. But you're not just saying them because they are the next obvious word. You're saying them because they convey the underlying thought that you're having. So it's driven by something more than just, other people said this, so therefore I will say it.
Right.
Now, you said language is excellent at conveying ideas. I'm going to challenge you on that because I think it's absolutely terrible at conveying ideas. If you have an idea that is different or doesn't match what people already know, think, and are steeped in through their personal experience, it's ineffective because you're trying to convey something using labels, markers, that are supposed to trigger the same thought in the other person, but you're having a thought that they haven't had. So when you use the language, it simply attaches itself to existing thoughts that person already has, so they translate your new idea into old language. If you've ever stood at the top of the Grand Canyon, big means something different. I have a different understanding of the word now. And so the label doesn't mean anything until you have shared experience. It's very powerful for saying things that people already think are true. It's been said so many times, it makes sense. If I say the opposite, your brain has nothing to attach those labels to, so it rejects it. And I think that's why words are very bad at conveying ideas. We think they're good because we already have the ideas, and all they're doing is they're triggering them. In an LLM, they are triggering a set of predetermined words.
There's the meme about people being NPCs, and in so many ways, we are little more than LLMs in that we trot out cliches. And actually, if you listen to the Zen heads, they're all about that. It's like the finger pointing to the moon. Stop looking at the end of the finger. This is just a signpost towards the feeling I'm trying to convey. I know we touched on music before, but that is perhaps why that seems so much more of a visceral type of language. You might argue that things like touch as well is a far more direct and visceral way to communicate than language.
I think language is simply a mechanism that we use to convey other things. It isn't thought. I always assumed everybody had an internal monologue, and I found out that more people don't have an internal monologue. So that means something very convincing. Thought does not require language. Because the only other conclusion is people without an internal monologue don't think, and they clearly do. And they clearly operate at exactly the same level, higher often than other people. So words aren't required for thought. All that's happening with people with an internal monologue is, if you like, their brain is just picking up on the signals from the thinking process, converting that into words as if you were trying to convey that to someone else. So people with an internal monologue are always practicing sharing their thoughts with someone else. But their thoughts are not driven by the language, and the language isn't required for the thinking. So thinking comes before language. To perceive language as thought is fundamentally flawed, because I think you could safely say that all reasonably functional animals think. They solve problems, they make decisions, they suppress behaviours and so on, certainly at the mammal level, but they don't talk. So thought comes before language.
I heard about that thing, about no internal dialogue, monologue, and I wasn't sure I believed it. I'm still not sure that I believe it. I just think it's possible that the metacognition to recognize it maybe isn't there. Because to me, otherwise, then you're never measuring what you're saying. You can't predict what your next thought is going to be. Thoughts appear and then they drift off. And they're like, where did you come from? And where did you go? It's just like clouds drifting through your singular point of focus. But it would imply, if there's no inner monologue, that you're alerting it the moment it comes through. And I can't see how, therefore, it's not nonsense or never mediated.
But that's the thing about the belief in language as the core process of thought. You're not thinking in words. You're thinking of concepts. So, the old thing, think of a grey elephant. Those words are converted into an actual memory. You just have to imagine the thing. And it happens accidentally. What is a dream other than your brain generating things from your memory, regurgitating them on the back of random noise that you experience during sleep? And those are all visual. They are all things that you see, feel and experience. Your brain is thinking when it's creating a dream. It's often very illogical. It's applying all its own fears to it. So you'll find out you can't get to something. None of it involves words, and there's no dialogue going on when you have a dream. So the dialogue is simply your language centre relaying what you're thinking back at you. Now, if you don't have an inner monologue, that doesn't mean all of that's not going on, and it doesn't mean that you're not choosing between all of the things. Now, I'd be interested to do an experiment in people without an internal monologue to see whether there was a delay in the ability to articulate a thought. Is there a delay because it hasn't already happened that's so imperceptible we don't notice it? But, does somebody with an inner monologue already have the words so they just blurt them out? I don't know. I do tend to do that, and I have an internal monologue, so maybe that's the case. It's just a separation of the functions.
Having played with the meditation idea where you just simply look at the tree without labeling it and without conceptualizing it in some way, and it's kind of difficult because language has imposed so much of that upon us. But what you do get in those rare moments where you can do it is simply the raw experience. And I guess if you took enough drugs or meditated long enough, that's all you're getting.
So here's an example maybe that's useful when we both play musical instruments. Do you narrate the chord sequences when you play them? Do you narrate your solo when you play it ad hoc in a jam session? That means the monologue only happens as a secondary feature. Because if you put yourself in a situation where you don't have the words for it, you can still do it. You can still build a thing. You can still look at a piece of wood and imagine cutting it in half. You don't narrate it. So the thought comes first, the action, and then in some situations where you're trying to reason something through, you do start the narration. I think you can immediately imagine situations where you don't have a narrative. You go, yeah, I don't remember having a narrative when I played that song. I just played it.
Yeah, the narrative becomes actually a barrier. Obviously, you have to know the language of the thing. You have to understand how to play whatever those chords. But the whole joy, everybody talks about the moments of flow, is when the brain shuts off and you are just in the moment and you're doing the thing. An obvious analogy is dancing or making love, doing these things where the brain will shut up for a moment and you can just immerse yourself in the physicality of it. Again, leads us back to the consciousness thing. I always say to people, it's because we're embodied and so much of our drives come from that, almost imperceptibly, in fact. The reason that we do anything is due to embodied drives, and a machine simply doesn't have any of those things, which is interesting that you talked about the robot arm. It's still working to a reward and punishment system, which is effectively what we have done over the years, primed around survival and reproduction. I have arguments with my son when I say everything could be reduced to a mating call. That primarily is the thing that's going to separate us from any kind of machines, because it's just never going to have it might have its own, but it's not going to feel like ours. And even if there is a there, it's going to be so different from ours that it's almost irrelevant.
Yeah, and I think that's really important. I've got two views on this. So embodiment, first of all, when we make decisions, we have an idea, we have a concept, it comes into our brain for whatever reason, and then we see how we're going to react to it. How do I feel about that? And we allow it to play almost as an imagined thing. And when it feels good, we do it. And when it doesn't feel good, we don't. So we're actually testing it against our own body. How do we emotionally respond to it? Are they feelings I like having? Some people like feeling sad, so they'll listen to sad music. Some people need to be uplifted. All of that happens in the decision-making process. And that proves there is a decision-making process going on. We are selecting. So an LLM can't do that. So an LLM can never choose between two possible sentences. It's only going to regurgitate the most probable one. Same with, you can't get an LLM to produce art that isn't anything other than derivative, because it can't accidentally do something and go, oh, I like that. If we were to embody a recurrent network, there's a possibility it could do all of that. But unless we gave it exactly the same senses as us and exactly the same feelings, it wouldn't necessarily come up with stuff that gelled with us. So we would listen to its music and go, ugh, that's painful. Whereas it might go...
But it might like it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So it's going to like something different. But there is something there around embodiment. I don't think that's what consciousness is, though, because I think that comes first. I think consciousness is the brain being aware of itself. Now, it's a philosophical argument, because nobody can ever do this. But if you were to separate the brain from the body and keep it going in a tank, brains do generate their own random noise, and that random noise gets amplified, as in dream, and it turns into thoughts, it turns into experiences. So would it evolve its own made-up world, totally random, nothing we would recognise, but be aware of that and think that this weird floating existence is reality, and that it's experiencing feelings from outside, when actually what it's experiencing is its own chemical noise that creates this world in which it operates? It would be aware, it would be self-aware, it just wouldn't be aware of anything we relate to reality. So I do think that there is a sense that awareness is just a feature of the brain itself, and embodiment means we have shared awareness and shared experience of a world that we all occupy, rather than a world we've invented in our own heads. That does, of course, raise the philosophical question, am I a disembodied brain and are you just a figment of my imagination? But that's a whole different game.
Is there anything that you could see in a machine that would lead you to think that it might have achieved some level of self-awareness? Is it an emergent thing, or like the panpsychists might believe, it's external and you can create conduits of this thing the way that a light bulb conducts electricity, so to speak? You described something almost in between, which is interesting.
Yeah, it has accidentally emerged in nature, and it's proved to be very useful in survival. So I therefore believe that nearly everything you ever come across that's alive is at some level aware, and it's a scale of awareness. I don't think there's a magic brick wall somewhere that says everything below this level is unaware and everything above this line is aware. I think that generally animate life, so anything with a nervous system, has some sort of awareness. Otherwise, where do you draw the line? And we've seen humans draw the line many times, and it's always a very bad outcome.
Yeah.
I think awareness is something that exists. In terms of neural networks and artificial intelligence, the idea that it will emerge by accident is utter nonsense. That is a refuge of somebody who doesn't know what they're doing. If I play with these chemicals, I will magically create cold fusion. That's what happens in films. It's the Hollywood story. It makes for a good superhero movie. The idea of it just emerging randomly by accident is nonsense. And the people in the LLM world who are making out that they're going to create AGI are either incredibly naive, or they know they're talking nonsense. And it's just for people who fall for that nonsense.
The more you play with these things, the more I'm looking at what they're saying and thinking, you are absolutely full of it, mate. This is nowhere near what you've promised. We're back to the flying cars thing in the 60s. Just, come on, man, this is nothing like what you said. It does feel increasingly like this is just keep buying the tokens and we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, I think as an engineer, it's important. You've got to be realistic if you're going to use them effectively. And the same at an intellectual level is true when you use a tool and believe it can do things it can't. With an LLM, you are replaying other people's thoughts. That's it. Quicker than you trawling through the internet, cutting and pasting content, trying to consume all of that knowledge. Obviously, when you take a shortcut, there are risks. Don't commit yourself to something without checking the facts. But you might be able to boil it down to 3 things you need to check. The best analogy I can think of off the top of my head is those books that you used to get where you'd make a decision and it'd say, if it's this, go to page 31. And there are many adventures that can play out. But in a book of that size, you can pretty much explore them all fairly quickly and predict where it's going to go next. Now, if I took an entire library and turned it into one of those, you never know where you're going to end up, and it would feel mythical and mysterious. It would feel like it was incredibly intelligent. But that's because of the source material being so rich and varied. It can pretty much take you wherever you want to go. And that is what an LLM is doing. It's not coming up with anything new. That's an amazingly powerful tool, but you've got to just be aware of what it's doing and also recognize that there's no free ride here. If you put one sentence in and say, expand this into a page, you're going to get 1 page of 1 sentence. You have to say, I have these 15 ideas, sum it up in a paragraph for me. Then you'll get something useful. The reason I get passionate about it is I get bothered by the fact that people might try to use it in a way that harms them or harms their organization or harms the people around them, or that just wastes a year of their life trying to solve a problem and burning money. If it's productive and constructive, that inevitably leads to more well-being for other people, more jobs, etc., whatever form it takes. But if it's destructive because of naivety or ignorance or being misleading information, that was avoidable. I think that's why I care about it, because people get hurt.
Absolutely. If that doesn't result in growth and more human flourishing, then I don't want it. And I don't think a lot of people want it. I think we're seeing huge pushback. The Eric Schmidt jeering incident, I think there's a lot of particularly young people just saying, we don't want this, piss off. I
think I'm positive. I think short term there's a lot of pain. Tasks will cease to exist, but the need for people to work full-time doing things will not go away. Let's not get into the philosophical debate about work as a way to live. As far as I'm concerned, the history of automation still holds good. There will be short-term displacement. People will find that a specific task that they've specialised in will suddenly disappear. I think throughout history we've seen specialisation is brittle. Typing pools don't exist anymore, for example. But that was just one task, and those people were capable of a myriad more things than just typing. You could just say it was a form of sexism. I'm sure they were typing that out going, I could write this a lot better if they just let me.
Is there any really ridiculous use cases you've seen?
Oh, try and perm from the list. It's endless. I think, it's the same every time. Somebody comes across a really difficult problem and they go, it's all right, we'll just throw an LLM at it and it's solved. It's not a magic bullet that comes up with magic answers. It won't. You have to apply human intelligence to come up with a conclusion.
Certainly a lot of companies thinking we can just insert this throughout our workflow and therefore take the human element out. And I guess there's some ways that if you could get volatile human reaction out of the equation and make it a little more data driven, that might be good, but you can't entirely rely on it. And I think, is this just going to be used to surveil and control in more and more Moloch-esque ways rather than human ways? It has to be human assisting rather than machine computer says no thing.
Yeah, it'll be all of the above. It'll be positive, it'll be negative, it'll be all of those things, because that's humanity. Each of us will use it for a purpose of our choosing. Do as many things as you can with it that are good, because then there's nobody available to go and do the other stuff, and nobody's forced to do the other stuff because they have to earn a crust. I think that's important. People will be busy.
Love it. Thanks, John. And you always make me feel like I'm a moron, which I quite like.
I have written endless songs. I've never put them in front of anybody. Nobody thinks they're any good. You have a gold disc on your wall that you wrote the song. I Googled it. You wrote it. I've heard it.
I've written better ones than that. That's the worst of it. That's a whole other subject. If it goes well and you think it's worth it, I'd love to do it again, because there's so much stuff I feel that we didn't cover.
I just find this sort of thing fascinating. Just
so do I.
Chewing the fat about ideas and seeing where it goes.
Everybody I bump against is having these conversations. I'm speaking to teachers, to psychologists, to artists, to programmers, and you have such a rich background and sensible take on it that it's great speaking to you.
I think so much of this conversation starts and arises from a fundamental lack of understanding in people about how amazing other people are. We are all fundamentally made from roughly the same number of neurons, roughly the same number of cells. We are all as equally messed up and amazing as each other. And the reason some people think LLMs are amazing is because they have a lack of appreciation of what actual humanity is. They see the surface and they go, that's what people are, that's what LLMs are. It's so much deeper than that. What an animal is, even what a cat can do, is so much more complicated when you look at it. And I think that's the problem. People just scratch the surface of what we are.
Do you have a microphone on your desk that you could pick up and then just... Amazing, man. Thank you so much for doing this. I would love to speak again.
I'd enjoy it.